I feel like I need a monocle. Anyways, today I'm going to be talking about Jennifer Donnelly's Revolution. And I picked up this book. I don't know if I'm the only one who does this. I picked up this book. And I bought 3 of her other books solely based on the strength of these shallow graves, which I thought was fabulous. So imagine my disappointment when I didn't care for this book. And now, where are they? I think they're here. Most of my books are in boxes. But now I'm questioning the wisdom of buying those other 3, honestly, because I don't even know what they're about. She has a number of books, and for some reason I chose these 3. I think I got them off of eBay, and I think it was one of those like, oh hey, if you buy this number of items from my shop, then you can have this kind of a discount, or you can get something for free. So I think I just was like, I'll get those 3 because they look like they're a set or really a trilogy. So eventually I do plan on getting to them, and fingers crossed they are more on the level of these shallow graves in Revolution, but we shall see. If you have not heard of this book, I will say this is for history buffs, and that is the part I liked. Because this book, I tell people I liked half of this book. Not like I preferred the first half to the second half, but it is, part of it is set in the present tense, and part of it is set during the French Revolution, and I really liked the French Revolution part, and so maybe that is why I liked these shallow graves so much, and maybe that's why I like this, Tea Rose, Winter Rose, and Wild Rose, because at least 2 of them are more historical. We'll find out. Where to start? I guess we'll just go in with the plot, the premise, the characters. The story centers around a 17-year-old named Andy, whose brother Truman had died 2 years prior, and naturally this devastates the family. Andy now no longer cares about anything but music, which, sidebar, could we get any more cliche? I think if it had been handled better, I wouldn't have minded, but the way it was done just felt super stereotypical. Let's move on. Her mother is practically catatonic and is an artist who now paints nothing but portraits of Truman, which kind of makes me giggle. Because I'm just imagining, and I think that's actually what they say, is this a study or something like that, is just wall-to-wall pictures of Truman, and I mean, it's just so creepy, it's funny. And then the dad is some award-winning geneticist who wasn't really in the picture to begin with, but now he has officially left the family, married a younger woman, and now she's pregnant. But what happens is, as I said, Andy doesn't care about anything, which includes school, and she's failing. Her dad finds out about it, and he's like, look, it's Christmas vacation. You are coming with me to France because he has some business there. And he's like, you're gonna get your senior thesis done. You're gonna graduate. And there we go. Which, can I just say, thank the Lord that when I was in school, I didn't have my graduation dependent upon a senior thesis or a senior project. From what I remember, it was stressful enough to pass my classes. So for it to not just be enough about what I've done all year, I also have to do a senior project in order to graduate? I think not. So she, as this guitar prodigy who's obsessed with music, has decided to do a project on the godfather, or just regular father of music. I think he's made up, I love music, but there's a whole lot I don't know. And his name is, forgive the butchering, Amédée Marlborough? I keep thinking of the cigarettes, but I think it's Marlborough. And when you know it, he's French, so it's the perfect place to do some research for her project. And the thing about this, and this is a problem I have, is when the story opens, like, you know something's wrong, but Andy doesn't really seem to care about anybody, not even herself. Like, the entire book, she's suicidal. And so what has happened is when her father finds out about her status at school, he decides to take her with him. He puts her mother in a hospital, like a mental institution, to help her get better. And Andy is livid. And so she's supposed to go to France for 3 weeks, but she's like, I gotta get home as fast as possible and get my mother out of this institution because she's qualified. I mean, as far as I could tell, she didn't care about her mother until she could no longer be with her mother. So now she thinks that she can come home, get her mom out of the hospital, and help her mental health? She didn't do it before. Why can't she do it now? I mean, the most she did was get her mom painting supplies, and that was just so that her mother would, like, not be completely catatonic. So she's like, I gotta get out of here. I'm gonna get my project done in 3 days. And of course, we all know it's not gonna happen. But what does happen is that she finds a diary written by a young French girl from the 18th century. The girl's name is Alexandrine, and her storyline mirrors some of Andy's storyline in that Andy's father has been called to France because his friend, who is an art historian, some kind of historian, and he has found the heart of someone in a jar, and he wants Andy's dad to do DNA testing to prove that it is Louis Charles. And if you know anything about French history, which I know very little, but I have seen Les Mis, so there's my point of reference. Louis Charles is the son of Marie Antoinette and I want to say King Henry? Give me a minute. Sorry, I should have known this, but for some reason, this little information didn't stick with my brain. Louis the 16th. Her husband is Louis the 16th. Their reign is during the French Revolution, and they eventually get beheaded. But the deal is that the children are locked away in towers, and it is assumed that Louis had died in this tower, but there's really no proof, and so now there's this heart. Alexandrine somehow gets involved with the royal family, so she is now able to give an account of this family and let us get to know these people, let us get to know Louis Charles, and I really like that, because if we had just had Andy's perspective and about what she's seen, because they're staying with her dad's friend G, so if all we saw was, like, her living in this place surrounded by antiquities, I don't think it would have been as effective of a storyline. So I really enjoyed seeing this history and kind of getting us into it, because as I said, I've only seen Les Mis, and I don't really understand any of it. I love history, but there's a lot of history in the world, so it's a lot to keep up with. I do remember the bread riots, but my understanding was they create this barricade, and then they win or they lose, and that's it. We're done, but that's not it. The bread riot was the beginning of the French Revolution. So that's where we are. We have Andy, we have Alexandrine, or Alex, and Andy gets invested in this Louis Charles debate or mystery because she is reading this diary. She does meet a boy, and this is what I really don't understand. We all know once she meets this boy, she really doesn't want to go back to America, but she's still dead set on getting back to America, even though I have not been convinced that she really cares about her mother. I feel like it's more about a temper tantrum of, I just don't want to be here, and so I'm going to use my mom as an excuse. There's more keeping her in France than there is in America. But I'm not the author. She got it published, so I guess she's right. Another part of the storyline is she takes an antidepressant. She abuses it, essentially, and she recognizes this. And so she likes to point out that if she takes too much, she hallucinates or she'll hear things. And so this is one of my major issues with the novel. Donnelly tries to go gothic by way of these antidepressants, and it doesn't work because it doesn't make sense. At the beginning of the novel, we get a lot of, oh, I think I see Truman here or there or wherever, and then she's like, no, I really don't. That's just my antidepressants. So we see Donnelly trying to weave it in there, but it's just not believable. And then there's a moment where Andy had been reading the journal, and then she wakes up, and she thinks that she hears people calling her name. And then she sees an image of a really creepy clown, and then she's like, oh no, that's just my antidepressants. There's nothing really there. I don't hear anybody. And then there's another instance where I really love history. And so I love this part for its historical context, not because of what Donnelly did with it, but in France, they had the catacombs because their cemeteries were so full that they had no more room. So they just dug up bodies and buried them under the city. Andy has gone in the catacombs and she's hearing things. And she's seen not the skeletons, but she's seen like the bodies that the skeletons used to belong to. She ends up taking the wrong path because she's following the voices. And then, obviously, a security guard or someone is like, you're in the wrong place. I don't know about that. Here is a major, major spoiler. We have this whole account from Alex. And I don't know if this part is historically accurate or if this is just what Donnelly did to kind of give Alex some relevance. But there was a character called the Green Man that would set off fireworks and was wanted by the law. I guess fireworks were outlawed by this point because the monarchy had fallen. Alex is the Green Man, and we get to a point in the diary where Alex is dying, and so we don't know what happens to Louis Charles. Like, we don't know, did he actually get secreted out of this tower? And someone else was put in his plate in that place, and that's where the heart came from, or like, well, we don't know, which I thought was kind of brilliant, because even though we don't get a complete answer, it's kind of like, well, sometimes that's how it is. Andy, let me give you a little bit more context. Just before all this weirdness I'm about to tell you about happens, she is told by her father that the heart most definitely belongs to Louis Charles. And I guess I thought this was completely absurd. And, okay, please excuse me if this is something that has happened to you, something that can really happen. It's just in the book, it just seemed completely absurd. It sets her off. It reminds her of Truman in some way, and she can't go on living. She doesn't see the point in life anymore, so she's gonna go jump off the Eiffel Tower. She runs into the love interest who plays in a band, and he's like, well, my band has this gig. Something's wrong with you, so you need to come with us. And the gig is in the catacombs. Then the police show up, and everybody bolts, and she follows this group of people who are obviously ghosts, okay? So now we're going back to the Gothic. Like, it just does not make sense within the narrative. The readers know that these people are not real. I guess they're not real in the living, breathing sense, but Andy, she's oblivious. She just can't catch a hint. So they lead her to 18th century France, and then she can't find her way back. But spoiler times 2, one of the guys in the group that she thinks is super hot is Amédée Marlborough, whatever his name is. Oh gosh, you gotta be kidding me. Are we really going there? And it wasn't so bad. But can we talk about obvious? And it still doesn't make sense, because in the end, she questions the reality of what happened. And she blames the whole thing because she, in her depressed manic state, overdosed on her antidepressants. And then the whole novel, she's also saying you cannot mix the depressants with alcohol, which she does at this party. And so she's just like, it's a bad reaction. But then she's stuck there for X number of days or weeks. In the end, I didn't mind the actual scenes. Donnelly does a really great job in bringing the history to life. But fit within the context of the narrative, it wasn't seamless. Eventually, Andy, and this is where I'm like, am I supposed to believe it's reality? Am I supposed to believe it's not reality? She is mistaken for being the Green Man. And she's like, hello, not the Green Man. So then I'm thinking, does she actually look like Alex? Because from what I have read in the story, Alex had disguised herself as a boy. But from what I remember of Andy, she doesn't particularly have a short haircut. I couldn't quite remember what she was wearing, but wouldn't people be like, that's a really odd outfit you have on? So she's mistaken for the Green Man, and she essentially slips into the Green Man's role and mirrors what we got from the diary up to the death. So it just was never really clear about whether it's supposed to be real or pretend. And sometimes I'm okay with ambiguity, but in this case, it just felt choppy. Like, Donnelly was trying to get things in there so if we could build up to this end in the 18th century, and it just never felt feasible. In case I've confused you, Andy doesn't die because somehow she makes it back to her own time, and it's all blamed on a blow to the head she received when trying to get away from the police. And then that's really it. There's an epilogue, and she has come to terms with Truman's death. She now lives with her mother in France. She has nothing to do with her father, and she works with a hospital or something like that. And this is not so bad, but she works with a hospital with children or people who have suffered traumatic incidents, and she uses her music to soothe them, to help them heal. But I would have been okay without an epilogue. That leads me back to one of my other issues with the story, is that, as I mentioned, Andy's dad was not really in the picture before Truman dies. So it really makes sense that he's not in the picture after Truman dies, but I sort of expected this France trip to be a bond maker of some sorts, like a way for these two to come to terms with what has happened with their relationship, particularly because, and pardon me for saying this, but they both blame themselves, and it's, again, very stereotypical. You know, in reality, people blame themselves for a tragedy. So that's not, I'm not trying to attack that, but because I felt like so much of the storytelling felt very cliched and stereotypical, I was like, well, of course Andy blames herself, which we've known this from the beginning. We know that's why she's basically given up on life, because it's her fault that Truman died. And then, of course, her dad is like, well, it's my fault. I think what I wanted to have happened, because she overhears him telling his new wife this, and it is a revelation to her. She's never heard this. No one's ever said anything about this to her. Even if they don't have a great relationship by the end, I thought maybe it would help them come to terms, because she hears him telling his wife, I should have been around more. And that is why he blames himself. So I'm thinking, now this is their chance to start something new, for him to be that better father that he obviously thought he should have been and hopefully thinks he should still be, since he still has a kid plus one on the way. And we do learn in the epilogue that he's a much better father to this new kid, even though he still has nothing to do with Andy. Back to the epilogue, I didn't need it. And then that goes back to this thing with Andy and her dad, where if there had been some kind of resolution within the actual storytelling, then the epilogue would have been unnecessary. Like, we wouldn't have needed a recap as to, this is really what happened in the end with me and my dad. But Donnelly put something really great in place and then dropped it like a hot potato. It was never mentioned again. This whole time, Andy essentially is just trying to get away from her dad. She never makes any attempts at bonding. After she hears this conversation, she does step forward to try to broach the subject with him. And I think he says something that hurts her feelings, offends her. It does something to change her mind. And so then she, like an angsty teenager, runs off to her room, locks him out, and has nothing to do with him for the entire book. And maybe this is how it is with divorced families, where one parent doesn't really know how to parent, so they let their kids get away with crap. My dad would have been like, I'm taking the door off the hinges, you don't slam it in my face, you don't lock it on me, we're talking, and then you're grounded. You know? Here is spoiler 3, you know, if I'm not technically counting all the other little, like, itty bitty spoilers that I just give along the way. Truman. I know you're all interested in Truman. Okay. I'm trying to figure out where to start with this, because again, I just have a really hard time accepting the way that Donnelly has it play out. But the deal is, it was this, not a group home, not a halfway home, but this building where it was like kind of a tenement building, and people stayed there until, I guess, a builder of some sort, a corporation, was like, we are going to turn it into a hotel. So now all of the tenants need to leave, and there's this one guy named Max who was bipolar. He had some kind of mental issue, and they had, because the mystery behind Truman's death. I thought it was going to be a lot more exciting, a lot more intriguing than it turns out to be. On this particular day, they're walking to school, and Andy sees a boy she has a crush on. And unbeknownst to her, this is also the day that the police are emptying the building of stragglers. And Max has, flipped that switch. Andy is like, all right, I'm going to let you, Truman, go to school by yourself from this point on. And Truman, as he's walking past the building, gets grabbed by Max, and Max ends up running with him into the street, and they get hit by a bus or a truck. In either case, they die. So now, this is why Andy blames herself, because instead of being the responsible older sister, she chose herself over her brother, and then her brother died, which I buy. Yeah, it is your fault. You chose a boy over your brother. Did you know what was going to happen because of that? No, but I will allow her to blame herself. Why I don't really like the way it's set up is because, probably just a misunderstanding on my part, is Andy does sprinkle in tidbits about Truman's death and about this guy named Max. And my assumption had been that Max was some sort of a friend of theirs, which I guess technically he is, in the context of they know him, they talk to him when they pass by, they've had conversations. But my impression was that Max had been her age, a friend of hers, and then, although I couldn't understand why he would run into the street, my initial thought was that they had just stepped into the street and somehow died. So, maybe in reality, the whole death thing is reasonable. But in my brain, it wasn't. I do think that in its epilogue, which it takes place about a year later, I thought that considering it took 2 years for Andy to face anything, 1 year, and she was like, yeah, I pretty much don't even think about Truman anymore, was unbelievable. Next on my list. All right, so let me show you my pro-con list. I've told you about it, right? Pro, con. Con. I know the pro list looks short, but it does encompass a chunk of the novel. There's just a lot of little things that took place during that other chunk of the novel. So we're going to get into some of those. One was the narration. Holy bad narration. I was extremely disappointed by the narrator. I just thought they could have gotten someone who did better. She made Andy come across as someone I didn't want to sympathize with, someone I didn't care about. It's just, there was no warmth there. I read another review and someone was like, I would give this an 11 out of 10. And she connected with Andy so much more than I ever did. And so this is something I meant to mention early on, but I would not recommend listening to Revolution, not just because of the subpar narration, but because there was a point that it was hard to keep facts straight. Largely, actually, entirely to do with Alex's diary, because it's all chronological. But around the time of the Revolution, I felt like, I had to look at my iPod to make sure I hadn't downloaded the tracks in the wrong order. Alex, she and her family are, I guess, players. They put on plays, they entertain the masses. That's how they make their money. That's how they come in contact with the royal family. The royal family has just lost their oldest son, and so in order to cheer up their new Dauphin, who is Louis Charles, they're like, we're going to bring you players into our home, and you're going to entertain our kid. She becomes his companion. There is a cousin. I think it's King Louis's cousin, Leon. I keep thinking of a lion, so we're just going to call him Cousin Lion. Alex is like, what's the deal with him? And Louis Charles is like, well, my mom doesn't really trust him. After the demise of the royal family, obviously Alex's family is back on the street, but nobody wants to be entertained with cheesy plays, and so they have a hard time making money, and she resorts to thievery. And she tries to steal a purse. She gets caught, but then he rescues her, only to reveal himself as, Cousin Lion, and he's like, I'm going to put you to use. And essentially, he, in this story, maybe in history as well, is the one who incited the uprising, because he wanted to be king. So then he goes about telling her, the enemy of my enemy is my friend, and she's thinking the revolutionaries are the enemy, and that the king is his friend. And so she thinks that all this spying, because I was really confused, but he transforms her, or, disguises her as a boy, so that she can get into the theater and somehow glean information, spy for him, whatever. But then there are points where she's back with the royal family, and I'm like, so have they fallen yet? Like, how did you get back at their good graces, especially since nobody recognizes her as Louis Charles' companion for the last, year or two? She spent a good amount of time with him, yet a haircut confuses people. So Cousin Lion disguises her as a boy so that she can infiltrate things and be a spy for him. And then, but there's all these back and forth things where where are we in the narrative, like the historical narrative, and then there is a diary entry where she talks about seeing his ghost. I'm like, he died? When did he die? And then later, he's still alive, but then we learn that he does eventually die. I was really, really confused, and especially because there's two narrators, so I didn't mind the Alex narrator so much as I didn't mind the Andy narrator, but her French accent is as such that me, who is a visual learner, I could not differentiate the names, and this is a good thing. It was very French, at least in my opinion. Like, I'm no French expert. I wouldn't recommend the audiobook because it can be very difficult to differentiate characters within the French narrative, and then just to kind of keep up with what's going on. You would need to see if events are chronological or not. What else can I complain about? Lots, actually, because I have a lot here. Let's talk about Louis Charles, because in many ways I saw him as the parallel to Truman, and I didn't mind this. I really didn't. It was obvious, but I didn't mind it. But we have this great mystery throughout the entire book. And then all of a sudden, yes, it's Louis Charles' heart. And that's it. And then we get to the end of the diary where we're like, all right, we're going to really learn. Did Alex manage to get him out of the tower and replace him with someone else? And then, oh no, we don't get any answers. Like, it's kind of cool. But I felt like the build-up, the climax, did not compare to the resolution. Way up here, and then it's like we didn't even come down. And then we fell, and that really bothered me because I was rooting for Louis Charles' escape. And there was this point when Andy is doing research for her project, and she can't find the birth certificate for Amadei, the musician. She calls them the moles, like the library gremlins, because I really want to go to France for this, but the library she's in is one of those things where they have to request certain kinds of books, and it goes down to the bowels, and then the moles bring the books up, and blah, blah, blah. And so she asks the mole, why is the birth certificate not here? And the mole is like, well, maybe he wasn't born as Amadei Marlborough. And I'm like, oh, he's Louis Charles! And I'm super excited. I'm ready to get to the end of the novel because I'm ready to be proven right. And then we learn, no, that heart belongs to Louis Charles. And Amadei was just a nobleman who, after the fall of the monarchy, his parents were guillotined because they supported the monarchy. How anticlimactic is that? Because we're led to believe that maybe this child king prince escapes, and maybe, according to my brain at least, he is where Amadei Marlborough came from. And it's just nothing. No. Just no. No. And so I was just so disappointed. All that just goes back to saying Louis Charles, I'm glad that they tied up the mystery of it, but I felt like it was resolved yet unresolved. As I said, we were up here, snap, and we're down here. Like, there was no descent. It was just, there you go. You know, it was a huge letdown. Since I've talked about the end, let me talk about the beginning. I thought it was super slow. It took me 2 tries to start this book. Andy just wasn't sympathetic. She's very stereotypical and cliche in this music is what saves my soul. It's the only thing that keeps me going. And so the book opens with her basically skipping class with a bunch of her classmates, because they're all entitled, privileged people who don't actually need to go to school. The whole deal with what they're doing, it's like their breakfast club where they just get drunk and whatnot, and that's the only way they can get through their school day. And so she's just like by herself. Well, first, she's insulting their host. And then she's just by herself playing like strumming notes on the guitar, and she has this key around her neck, which I really liked this key aspect. I thought it was kind of cool. Someone tries to talk to her / hit on her, and she's like, meh, not having it. And she's just really rude. She completely skips her entire school day, plays guitar on the street until her fingers bleed, and only goes to school for her music lesson. I know Donnelly was trying to set her up as this tragic hero, but she felt like she was having a massive pity party. I couldn't get into it, and so I guess in a way the beginning and the end mirror each other. Like the whole novel, there's a lot of mirroring, a lot of parallels. So it was a really slow opening. I guess it was maybe 1/3 of the way into the book. It wasn't until she found the diary that I got interested. And then, I mean, not technically when she finished the diary, because then she did that whole weird let's go to the 18th century thing. So then once that ended, I was like, I don't really care. I just don't. So most of the time, I was waiting for her to read the diary, which, let me tell you, a lot of books you read, the protagonist will have the artifact, right? But they don't want to read it. They read it really slowly, and the entire book, you're just waiting for that next entry. Donnelly did not make me wait. Andy would just read and read and read, and I was like, yes, I love it. Oh, that reminds me. Talk about cliche. So, Andy, as I said, has been jonesing to get out of Paris, which, who here would agree with that? Not I. She has met Virgile, who is the love interest, and it's actually kind of funny if you think about it. They form this immediate connection, and she sneaks out to see him and do all of this stuff, and I'm like, you know what? You're only 17. Like, that is not feasible. Maybe 17-year-olds do that. Maybe I was just too good of a kid to actually do that. But she's like cruising around France with him in the dawn's early light. She meets him, and yet she's like, I love him, but I don't love him. I mean, she doesn't really say that, but that's the feel you get. And she's like, I really gotta get back home, but, oh, Virgile, I don't really want to lose him, but I'm gonna go anyways. And she's not able to go home for various reasons, but she doesn't tell him. But she's like, all right, I'm gonna go back to the cafe where I met him. And, of course, she sees him with another girl, and she mistakes this as being his girlfriend. And we're all supposed to believe he's been playing Andy the whole time. Like, that's not how he's been set up whatsoever yet. As soon as she sees him with this girl, she's like, oh, he's a terrible person. So she gets out of Dodge. And she's like, I'm never gonna speak to him again. Even though he calls her, like, immediately after she leaves the cafe. And she's like, I'm never gonna talk to him again. So, of course, when they meet up at the Eiffel Tower, she's like, ah. It's just super ridiculous. I will give you one guess as to who this girl is. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. His sister? Isn't that always how it is? Couldn't Donnelly have been a bit more inventive? Ugh. Well, on that note, I'm gonna sign off. Because I can't relive this book anymore. Will I try to read it again? No. No. But I want you to try. I want you to say if you agree with any of my assessments, and I really just want to know if you guys like Andy any more than I did. Because obviously that one reviewer did, but there we go. Until next time, bye!